Good evening. My name is Sue Smerrick. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area. I welcome you to the online forum this evening featuring candidates for the 53rd District of the Michigan House of Representatives. The candidates will be on the ballot of the primary election Tuesday, August 4th. This year, the League of Women Voters is celebrating 100 years of expanding voter rights, educating voters, and shaping and influencing legislation at the local, state, and national levels. We are pleased to sponsor these forums. The League is a nonpartisan civic organization that encourages informed and active participation by all citizens in government. The League works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and seeks to strengthen and broaden knowledge about our form of government and democracy. While the League does not support candidates or parties, we do take stands on issues we've studied. One of the League's most important goals is to assist voters in making informed choices at the polls, and thus we bring you tonight's forum. Our moderator tonight is Jeff Smerrick, who will explain the format and get us started.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It's my honor now to introduce the two candidates running for the 53rd District of the Michigan House of Representatives, Sam Larson and Yousef Rabhi. Thank you, candidates, for participating in this forum. The forum today will have this format. Each candidate will have an opening statement of up to 1 minute. Each candidate will have a closing statement of up to 90 seconds. In between, I will ask questions which came from the Ann Arbor community. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to a question. 2 minutes. At appropriate times, a sign on the screen will indicate the time remaining, 30 seconds, and then stop. If you have used up your time, you will be allowed to finish your sentence, and then your microphone will be muted so that the other candidate has an equal opportunity to participate. The candidates will begin speaking in alphabetical order. Depending on the number of questions, all candidates will have an opportunity to be the first or last to answer the questions. Mr. Larson, we're now ready for your opening statement.
Hey everybody, my name is Sam Larson. I am a former butcher, small business owner, entrepreneur, restaurateur, and currently a stay-home dad of a 2-year-old who actually just had his birthday a couple days ago. I believe that progressive politics are where it's at. I believe they are the best bet for Michigan politics going forward as far as helping local businesses, maintaining, a healthy environment, and supporting our families. I'm interested in the political situation right now because we're seeing a lot of really unprecedented things between the two parties. The opposing party in particular really needs to be held accountable for a lot of anti-democratic themes in their policies and behaviors.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And now, Mr. Rabhi, may we have your opening statement?
Absolutely. So I want to start by thanking the League of Women Voters for always hosting such a fantastic forum for the citizens of the Ann Arbor community to learn about the candidates that are going to be on the ballot. My name is Yousef Rabhi, and I serve as your state representative in Lansing. I'm currently serving in my second term in the state house, and this term, I'm actually serving as the Democratic floor leader, which is an exciting opportunity to help influence change in Lansing. I'm proud to have been voted the most liberal state representative in my first term in the state house. And every term thereafter, I feel like I've tried to live up to that by introducing things like a plan for single-payer universal health care for the state of Michigan, a bill to make polluters pay to clean up the messes that they make, a bill to end the theft of our water by Nestle, corporations like Nestle, a resolution to shut down Line 5, even an amendment to end the theft of our school aid dollars that should be going into the classroom and not being used for general fund purposes. It's been a great journey to be your state representative, and I hope that you'll re-elect me to the State House in August.
Thank you, candidates. And now to the questions. As a reminder, I will be reading the question once, and it will not be repeated unless requested. To begin tonight, we will start with Mr. Rabhi. Mr. Rabhi, first question to you. What will you bring to the Michigan legislature to overcome the extreme partisanship which has gripped Michigan government? How will you work with members of both parties for the benefit of Michiganders?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of great opportunities to do that. And that's actually what I do every day as your state representative in Lansing. I'm currently serving in my second term in the State House. And before that, I served for 6 years as a Washtenaw County Commissioner. And both as a county commissioner and now as a state representative, I've worked across the aisle to try to make lasting change. And one of my proudest achievements that is bipartisan is one of the areas that I've actually found a lot of great working relationships with the Republicans on is actually the issue of alternative energy and making it easier for folks to put solar panels and other alternative energy type systems on their homes. The first bill that I ever got signed into law was part of a bipartisan package to remove barriers for folks that want to put solar panels on their homes. As many Ann Arbor residents know that have put solar panels on their homes, there have been onerous barriers that have been put in place. And one of the things that I've been really proud of is passing that legislation. Governor Whitmer signed it into law, and we did that in a bipartisan fashion. We've also worked in a bipartisan way to work against some of the most egregious corporate welfare and tax giveaways to corporations in the state of Michigan. I have actually found allies on the other side of the aisle that I've developed relationships with to be able to fight against this complete onslaught that we see basically every day in the halls of the legislature, where rich corporations are buying their way to lobbyists to push forward legislation that gives them preferential tax treatment. We cannot allow that to continue. And I've actually found that there's a way to work in a bipartisan way to push against some of that. So I've been proud of the bipartisan relationships that I've built. And I've built those relationships, by the way, without for a second compromising my strong progressive values when I bring my ideas to the table.
Thank you, Mr. Rabhi. And now, Mr. Larson, the same question to you, sir.
Yeah, like I mentioned previously, polarization is kind of a big deal right now, and the two parties are quite at odds. And so when we talk about what political leaders are responsible for in the Republican Party, what needs to be done on the leadership level is really being able to hold those kinds of egregious behaviors, to task. As a political outsider, a business owner for 20 years and entrepreneur in the food industry, I have a lot of common ground with people whose primary interests might be economic in nature. And so I do get along really well with people who have, Republican leanings or more conservative values and that sort of thing, while still being able to communicate the ideas of progressive values and like the kinds of positions that the government should support in the name of helping communities, vulnerable communities, small local businesses, and that sort of thing. And so really being able to strip away the sort of egregious behavior of Republicans in particular is really important on a one-on-one level between political leaders. And so that's definitely something that I would, attempt to do as a new elected official, and is something that we really talk about a lot on the ground. As we know, friends and family who are of opposing political views, you can't just outright say, I'm not talking to you anymore for the most part. And so being able to kind of talk to, your family, your friends, your coworkers who have very different views is a really good way to get a feel for the on the ground impacts of what extreme polarization among political leaders can do.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And you get the next question right now. Since January of 2020, about 115,000 Americans and about 6,000 Michiganders have died from the COVID-19 virus, especially in congregate settings, including senior facilities, prisons, and large workplaces. Adequate testing and contact tracing for the COVID virus have not yet been achieved. What healthcare and public health strategies are necessary to protect the health of Michiganders in all settings, especially if there's another wave of COVID cases in Michigan?
Yeah, I'm definitely with Yousef on this one. Is single payer healthcare goes a long way to providing the sort of safety net that a pandemic like this requires. Actually, I was working at the hospital. I was recently laid off because of the pandemic and a shortage of, non-COVID related patients and stuff. And so that really throws a personal spin on the fallacies of for-profit healthcare, right? And so we have a system that's built around not helping people as its core goal. So looking forward into what might be a second wave, we need to really look at what it takes to continue to push for investments in, testing and contact tracing and such, and remembering that our key focus as, the government and the support systems of, medical centers and stuff like that is that people need to be healthy and that the economy will bounce back at any point we want it to, because those kinds of economic minds are capable of doing that. The business community in Michigan is really robust. I know a lot of small business owners that we're really on the fence about trying to open again, even though it's, as a small business owner, your business is your life and your passion, but the health and safety of yourself and your friends and your community, is way more important. So really being able to focus our efforts as leadership on the health of the people and not the health of money is going to be a guiding star for this kind of an endeavor.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And now, Mr. Rabhi, the same question to you, sir.
Thank you. So we need to stop putting people, profits before people. And that's what we've seen in this country. We've seen the Trump administration completely botch the COVID-19 response because he's more interested in putting profits before people, because he wants his rich billionaire buddies to make money off of the PPE instead of making sure that it gets to the right places. We need to make sure that our nurses, that our frontline workers are getting the PPE that they need in order to protect themselves and to protect the patients that they're working with. But one of the things that I am proud to have sponsored in 2018 was a bill to create a single-payer universal healthcare system for the state of Michigan. It is absolutely what we need today. We needed it yesterday. We needed it months and years ago. This is an unjust system of healthcare that we have in America, where we're forcing our neighbors to have to choose between their health and their basically financial well-being. Do they want to make their family go bankrupt, or do they want to get the healthcare they need? When somebody is having, when somebody has COVID-19 and they're going to the hospital for treatment to go on a ventilator, they should not have to choose between getting the care that they need and making their family go bankrupt. So that's why we need a single payer healthcare system in this state and in this country. And I think we can do it with bills like MyCare, which is what I introduced. Now, the other side of this is the economic side. And we need to make sure that we protect workers from corporations and businesses that are just trying to make money. I introduced a bill right as the pandemic was starting to protect workers from adverse employment actions if they were complying with the public health directive. So say they were staying home to quarantine, or they were staying home because their kids were home from school. Their employer couldn't come in and say, you're fired because you're complying with that public health directive. My bill would have protected them. Unfortunately, the Republicans in Lansing wouldn't give it a hearing, and the bill has not moved forward yet, but it was introduced right at the beginning of the pandemic. We need progressive policy in order to keep people safe and to make sure that everybody's economic well-being is also taken into account.
Thank you, Mr. Rabhi. And the next question starts with you. More than 32 million Americans have lost their jobs in just the first 3 months of this year. And as of April, Michigan had a 22.7% unemployment rate. All this economic wreckage will cause Michigan to have a projected $3.2 billion budget deficit. How should Michigan support its citizens, especially the unemployed, given this projected $3.2 billion state budget deficit?
I think there's really two parts to your question. And the first part is around the unemployment system. I'll talk about that first. My team has been dealing almost exclusively with unemployment cases for the last several months. We've had a flood of constituents contact our office wondering how to get through to get their unemployment to process and to get paid. And we've been trying to work with as many people as we can to get those payments expedited. But the reality is, in the state of Michigan, under the Snyder administration, there was a concerted effort to undercut the system and to create an unemployment system that was not meant to give benefits to people, but was meant to deny benefits to people. And so we've seen, whether through the MIDAS computer system, which is programmed to reject cases, or whether it's through these onerous restrictions that have been passed into law to reduce the number of people that can be on unemployment, we've seen a massive spike in people that cannot access the unemployment system. That's a problem today, and it's a problem we need to fix in the long term. Now, the second question was around the budget, $3.2 billion deficit. Some people say we need to wait on the federal government to give us money. I say that's not good enough. For too long in the state of Michigan, we've given preferential tax treatment to corporations. We've given sales tax breaks. We've given mega tax credits, $600 million in mega tax credits to large corporations in the state of Michigan. We need to eliminate that. I introduced a bill to sunset mega. That's $600 million of new revenue to the state that could help to offset that $3.2 billion shortfall. We also are in a state right now that actually gives an exemption to foreign dividend investments. So corporations that invest their money overseas that make money on those investments do not have to pay taxes in the state of Michigan. That's $250 million that we are losing to our state coffers. We need to repeal that and return that money so that we can spend it on our schools, so that we can spend it on our local governments, so that we can fix our roads. That's where that money should go. We need to end corporate welfare in the state of Michigan, and that can help to solve this $3.2 billion shortfall that we're in without putting it on the backs of everyday hardworking Michiganders.
Thank you, Mr. Rabhi. Mr. Larson, the same question to you.
That was all really great stuff. I love it. So when we're talking about the unemployment system, there's definitely, the idea that the unemployment system is not designed to be a helpful thing, but is definitely something that needs to be overcome as we look at when, global events like this happen. The idea that unemployment is such a tiny amount, it hasn't increased in however many years, it's not meant to be help for people who really need it. It's not a viable safety net for most people. When you're coming off of, whatever your job may have been, a business owner even, or my wife who's self-employed, unemployment's not there for her. So it doesn't exist as sort of this like universal helpful system for people. And it definitely needs to be looked at in that way so that the fear of job loss isn't something that everybody has to carry with them at all times. So going from there, and then we look at, the budget for the state as a whole, budgets are a good way to look at what an organization's priorities are. And so when we look at stuff that is, the unemployment system physically, the computer system that runs, the state infrastructure, that sort of investment hasn't been a priority. And so it obviously should be in order to handle stuff like this. And then again, going forward, looking at where our tax cuts go or what kind of corporate breaks we get, that's blatantly telling the smaller local businesses and such that their needs are not priority by the state, because the benefit that the small businesses give to the local communities doesn't show up in, the pocketbooks of political leaders in some weird indirect way. And so definitely looking at those kinds of where we reallocate the investments into the smaller local aspects of the communities to really strengthen the foundations of how we rebuild from such a huge budget deficit.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And the next question goes to you also. On May 14, protesters carrying Nazi swastikas, Confederate flags, and automatic assault rifles stormed into the state capitol in Lansing. They were protesting Governor Whitmer's executive orders trying to stop the spread of the deadly COVID virus. And the protesters even tried to force themselves onto the floor of the legislature itself. Could you comment on the nature of these protests and what, if anything, should the legislature do to prevent armed trespassers from seizing control of the Michigan legislature?
Yeah, that was a crazy day and super scary for those of us who weren't actually even in Lansing, and so I can't even imagine what it was like to be there in person. So high fives, everyone, for getting through that. Those kinds of protests have no place in this kind of the kind of democracy that we imagine ourselves to be. White supremacy is a terrible disease that our country was founded on, and it needs to be addressed regularly, often, and loudly, right? I know there's a lot of fundamentalist perspective about the Constitution and how much we love the Second Amendment and the freedom of speech and those kinds of things. But again, when we interpret those things, it has to be from a perspective of, your own freedom of speech is not to promote hate speech against other people. And the minute you start, threatening other people, spouting a white nationalist agenda, like that is not the kind of thing that the everyday hardworking Michigander subscribes to, right? And so I know there was some stuff in the works to try to prevent weapons like that from being carried in the Capitol. I think that kind of initiative definitely needs to continue to go forward. I mean, the whole thing, we made international news with the not allowed to have posters, but you can carry your guns into the Capitol, and that's like kind of embarrassing. So stuff like that, that sort of common sense, we shouldn't have guns in the Capitol, definitely needs to get pushed pretty hard. But white supremacy in particular, that extreme wing of right-wing politics needs to get addressed, discouraged by the political leadership, and shut down at its source.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And Mr. Rabhi, same question to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Jeff. So my father is Algerian American, and he moved to this country as a young man to go to college here. We still have many family members that live in North Africa. And one of the things that really struck me on that day when I was on the floor of the Capitol, hearing those armed terrorists try to break their way onto the floor, it was a reminder for me of some of the stories that I had heard from my family members who experienced terrorism and fundamentalism firsthand and have seen the impact of what happens when armed gunmen try to take over places of civic government. So what we saw on April 30th was an amazingly bad thing for America. But where do we go from here? Because part of the issue is guns in the Capitol, and we've pushed really hard to make the Capitol Commission change its policy. The Capitol Commission, by the way, is controlled by the Republicans right now. We want them to change their policy to say no guns in the Capitol. I've also co-sponsored legislation to ban guns in places of government across the state, including the Capitol. But the issue is bigger than just the Capitol. The issue around gun safety in America is one of the top issues that we are facing. And that's why I've also co-sponsored legislation to create universal background checks on all weapons. Right now in the state of Michigan, you can walk into a sporting goods store and walk out with an automatic assault rifle that day with no background check. That is unacceptable. So the bill that I co-sponsored was actually an effort to make it so that all guns had to have background checks. But the bigger issue here is white supremacy in America and is the colonization of Black and brown communities. We need to fight back against that. We need to pass better laws in the state of Michigan that protect against hate crimes and hate speech, like what we saw on April 30th at the Capitol.
Thank you, Mr. Rabhi. And now, Mr. Rabhi, you get the first bite of this apple. Michigan's K through 12 school system has had undesirable levels of student performance in recent years. Given the COVID pandemic and a projected $3.2 billion state budget deficit, what strategies do you support for the maintenance of quality K through 12 and post-secondary education in Michigan?
Yep, so a lot of that, thank you again for the question, Jeff. A lot of that comes to what I was saying earlier too. I will not vote for an austerity budget, a budget that includes cuts to our schools. To me, the $3.2 billion budget deficit is solvable by creating new revenue. We have something in the state of Michigan called the Headley Amendment, which limits the amount of revenue that the state can take in. However, we are about $10 billion short of that limit. so we can raise revenue in the state of Michigan, basically double what we raise now into our general fund. And some of the ways that I propose to do that are things like I talked about earlier, eliminating the mega tax credits, $600 million back to the general fund. I proposed a bill to do that. Eliminating the foreign dividends exemption, $250 million. Did you know that we exempt from taxation the equipment that factories use that they're required to install by the EPA to filter out air and water toxins? We exempt that from sales and property taxation. That's close to $200 million that we forego. Sales taxes, 74% goes directly to our school aid fund. And every time we give a sales tax exemption, we are cutting money from the schools. I have voted no on just about every single sales tax exemption that I can think of, whether it was for private airplane parts, which ridiculous enough, that was a bill that we saw to exempt private airplane parts from sales taxation, all the way to exempting motorboat fuel from the gas tax. I voted no. I was one of 3 individuals in the entire legislature that voted no. I was one of 3 Democrats that voted against a $1 billion tax giveaway to Dan Gilbert in Detroit so that he could keep building his towers downtown. He wanted $1 billion of our hard-earned state tax dollars to go into his pocket. I was one of 3 Democrats in the state legislature in the state house that voted no on that bill. We need to reverse those types of corporate crony capitalism and put the money back where it belongs, in the classroom, to help our students succeed.
Thank you, Mr. Rabhi. Now, Mr. Larson, same question to you, sir.
Thanks. Yeah, that two-pronged approach is definitely will manifest itself on if we can be sure to commit to education being a priority of the state. That sort of, corporate welfare capitalism is just disingenuous to the people who are growing up, learning, living in the communities around Michigan. And so as we look at budgets going forward after this, pandemic and all of the implications and the ripple effect from everything going on right now, where we manage to focus our investments, investing in education never turns out bad, as long as it's led by experts in the field, educators, teachers, people who know what they need on the ground and how to use it. That's not to say how they can use less to get by, but instead offering them everything that they ask for. And again, building from the flip side, relying on corporate subsidies isn't the way to build a strong economy going forward. Instead, we want to look at what it takes to invest in local businesses, smaller community, tighter knit types of investments that are secure in the long run and have a vested interest in then building better systems around the schools that support the kids of the business owners, et cetera, et cetera. So that's that, actually.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Larson. And now it's time for our closing statements. We will begin with Mr. Larson. May we have your closing statement, sir?
Yes. Sorry about that for a moment. I just want to say it was super fun to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. It was really great to hear from Yousef, and really great to see everybody participating. And it's been really, everybody's really been very accommodating for the whole lead up to all of this and communicating really well. And I am a huge fan of pro-democracy groups. It's just the level of activism that I've been able to experience as a new candidate has been really spectacular. So again, my name is Sam Larson. I've been a business owner for a long time. I've been very involved in the food industry throughout Michigan as a butcher, restaurant owner. I've done some work with distributors, farmers, producers, and I'm very invested in the idea that Michigan is a great place to live. We have the opportunity to push politics in a progressive direction, and that's what needs to be done in order to continue to, lift up communities throughout Michigan, and especially those of us who are in vulnerable positions, whether it's, minority communities, communities of color, poverty-stricken areas, people whose businesses have been closed because of the pandemic. progressive politics are really where it's at for making sure that the people are the focus of government action and not profiting and such like that. Again,
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, very much. Now, Mr. Rabhi, may we have your closing statement?
Absolutely. And thank you, Jeff and Sue and Emma for keeping time. You did a fantastic job. And thank you, Sam. This has been a fantastic opportunity to talk about the issues. So we didn't really get to talk about some of these other topics, and I want to quickly touch on them. My campaign is centered around what I call the 4 E's. And the first one, we talked about a little bit, an economy that works for everyone. And that's fighting for things like ending corporate welfare and investing in working people in the state of Michigan, supporting our labor unions and the strong labor history that we have in the state of Michigan. The second one is equity and fighting for an equitable future for all. And that includes equal pay for women. That includes our LGBT community, which had an amazing ruling today, which extended workplace protections across the country. The third E is education and fighting for strong education funding in the state of Michigan. We talked extensively about that. But the fourth E, and actually on education, I did want to mention too, the DeVos agenda is one of the other reasons why our system has been undercut, whether charter schools or for-profit schools. We need to end those practices and focus our resources again where they should be, on traditional public schools. But the last E that I wanted to touch on too was our environment. And fighting for a brighter future for all means fighting for a better environment. We need a clean energy future. That's why I support the Green New Deal. And we need to fight to make sure polluters pay to clean up their messes. If you're interested in learning more about me and my candidacy and the work that I've done as your state representative for the last 2 terms, visit voterabhi.com. And thanks for tuning in today.
And thank you, candidates. Thank you for participating in this valuable session. I will now turn this over back to Sue for our closing comments.
The League thanks the candidates for participating in tonight's forum and those who contributed questions. All our candidate forums will be available for streaming on your computer or smartphone. Go to our website, lwvannarbor.org, and look for the link to the programs. In addition, the forums can be reviewed on CTN, that's the Community Television Network. Please urge your friends and neighbors to watch the forums as well. For additional nonpartisan voter information on candidates and ballot issues, go to vote411.org. That's VOTE411.org. The League's voter resource guide covering local, state, and federal candidates and current proposals that will be on your ballot. With the passage of Proposal 3 in 2018, all voters are now eligible to cast absentee ballots. In addition, while voters are encouraged to register ahead of time, Michigan law now provides for same-day voter registration if you go in person to your local clerk's office. So just remember, no matter how you do it, make sure you vote in the August 4th primary election. And good night.